it's Zoe and welcome to my show, Paranormal Extraction. Today we have on internationally known Mark Olly. Check out all his best-selling books on Amazon.com. Did you know that he is much more than that? He's an archaeologist, a musician. He speaks at a ton of events. This man is absolutely amazing. And today we are going to get the truth. Yes, the truth. Not what you see over here, not what you read here. It's all kind of a mishmash. The truth on the history and mysteries of the Knights Templar. I love this subject. Hey Mark, I am so glad you're on the show again. I mean, you're one of my favorite guys. I mean, you're kind of like a no bullshit person.
Well,
and
yeah.
I'm going to use that. Well, I'm going to use those words because you are.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing I love about you is you're very eclectic in the styles that you've done with your books. You know, we have some alien stuff. We have King Arthur, all kinds of really neat stuff that you've written about.
Uh-huh.
So I just want to let you guys, go check his books out on Amazon. It's really easy to find. But this subject, I got to tell you, I've always been really fascinated by it. But what really pisses me off is that everything is different in every show I watch. So
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm getting the right information. And so I know you by being into history, okay, that you're the fat guy. So I'm going to the fat guy.
Okay.
So
well, you mentioned books. I mean, the ones I've already got out, if folks want to sort of head for the ones that mentioned the Templars, the one to do with King Arthur, which came out 2 books ago, that's particularly significant because obviously you can't talk about the Holy Grail and things like that without, drifting into Templar territory.
Yeah.
Arthur's, it's medieval legend again, so you're on Templar territory again. It's something that the Templars were very, very interested in. So there's a load of Templar information in that one. If you go back a bit further, Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood, Robynhoode, that's the book you want. Because Robin Hood is a Templar. There's a lot of evidence in there to indicate that he was a member of the order. So there's, again, quite a lot of information in that. So if folks want to go for particular books. But the reason for doing the interview today is that I'm actually in the middle of working on a book on the Templars.
Oh, my God!
Finally, at last. It's called, working title is The Keys to the Templars, or The Keys to the Temple, or, Seeking for the Keys to the Templars, or something like that. So I'm calling it Keys, but that's what I'm working on at the moment. I'm hoping to have that out by the end of next year, so believe me, you've got the drop on this one.
My God, I mean, you pump out stuff, and I mean, it's not just all UFOs,
No.
or it's all just one subject. It's all different, is what's the blessing is when you go and look up your stuff and you start reading it, and then you say, well, wow, okay. Something about Knights Templar. Okay, well I know he knows his shit, so I'm gonna grab that book and use it because he's saying the facts. So tell me, how and when did the Knights Templar form? Like, when did it first come around?
There's a bit of build-up, okay? There's a couple of things I'm just going to chuck in to give you some background, okay?
Sure.
Everybody thinks the Templars just suddenly appeared out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, that just isn't true, okay? The idea, for example, of monks who can walk around carrying swords, that's a bit of a kind of, how the heck does that come about? Well, that goes back to Celtic Christianity. If you go back to the early church, just at the end of the Roman period, around about the 3rd, 4th century, the Culdees, the monks that were wandering around then, these guys you see sort of wearing long cloaks, and they usually go in threes, the Celtic holy men, the sort of leftovers of the Druids, carried swords. We've got depictions of them carrying swords. So the idea of having a monk that's willing to defend himself, in what is then a violent world, that's fairly acceptable. So they're not the first monks to carry swords. Another one is their symbol as well. You've got this circle with the flared Templar
I love that
cross.
symbol.
It's so distinctive, and in red on a white background, sometimes circled in gold. Well, we find that on late Roman period, early Christian baptistries, especially in North Africa.
Yes, I was just reading about that.
Yeah, so that goes all the way back to that, and they've literally pinched it verbatim straight off these early Christian monuments.
Right,
and the big one.
So they existed before they actually thought they existed.
Oh, 500, 600, 700 years before they came into being. This.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And the Coptic Church as well. I've got to throw the Coptic Church in because Ethiopia, Egypt, Africa, all around those different areas, they're using the same cross symbol, which is actually equal arms. So in the Roman military sense, the Roman military were using it to represent the sun. It was an equal arm cross in a circle. It's a solar wheel cross. That's how they understood it. And basically the Knights Templar just picked that up and ran with it. That was, they were using it because it was an early Christian symbol. And there is that crossover, that kind of, Christianity having connections to the sun. There's that very famous picture I think it's in the catacombs in Rome. You've got this chariot being pulled by horses, and this figure, and he's got a halo, and he's got this, equal arm cross shining behind him. And the early archaeologists assumed it was Helios, which is the Roman god that pulls the sun across the sky in his chariot. But actually it's not, it's on a Christian grave. It's much later than that, it's 4th, 5th century. Wow. And it's a depiction of, it's Christ in glory, but depicted as Helios, going backwards. So when you start to look at that kind of background, the Templars didn't suddenly come flying in out of a vacuum. They were, all the bits, the elements that they needed were already there, and especially in a sort of monastic military context. And then, I suppose the real question is when do they get going? When do they start?
Exactly.
First crusade. Basically, I think it was 1096. There was a call for crusade. The reason for the crusade was there'd been a lot of toing and froing in Jerusalem. With sometimes the Christians are in charge, sometimes the Muslims are in charge. There's different strands of Islam in charge. All these different people in charge. And as of sort of the 600s onwards, the empires over there, the Islamic empires, I won't go into great detail, but they took control of Jerusalem. So by the time you arrive in the 1000s, with the nasty Normans and all that, you're going to have a lot of difficulty if you're a pilgrim and you want to gain access to Jerusalem. So the gist of it was, well, we're just going to go over there and take it back. That was the idea of crusade.
Wow.
And the first crusade, they set off in 1096. They arrive outside the walls of Jerusalem in 1099. And there's a lot of toing and froing, there's lots of military activity.
Wow.
The first group to come up is the Knights Hospitaller. They're the guys in the black and white with the pointy star. And they decide they're going to stop fighting, hang up the swords and shields, and go and treat the injured knights. So they're the first order of knights. And they align themselves with the merchants of Amalfi, who are in the hospital, hence they're called Hospitallers, which has been stuck in the middle of Jerusalem since about 900 AD. So they go there. So they're the order of knights that go treat other knights. Go a little bit further forward. I tell a wonderful story. I've got this wonderful idea in my head. Because what happens is, all the knights have different, technical terms, hostelries, but we call them pubs. Basically, they all park the pubs next to each other. So you can imagine they're in and out of each other's pub all the time, So once the Crusade's over, you get sort of drifting into the 1100s. You can imagine, this bunch of French knights, wanting to start an order. So they go and sit down in the pub and have a chat with the Hospitallers. And the Hospitallers are like, yeah, this is a fantastic idea, this, we applied to the Pope, the Pope said we could become this order, we got a charter and all this and the other in 1113 AD. You lads ought to give it a try. So all the French knights then do the same thing. There's an interesting little note Bishop of Chartres in France gets this note from the Crusades that basically says, the Knights of Christ are forming. That's the gist of it. You know, the Knights of Christ are coming into being. That's in 1114. Wow. So that's 4 years before the official start date. Wow. The official start date for the Templars is 1118. But they're not known as the Knights Templar. I think they start off as the Knights of Christ. That's what they are. They start off with this idea of, you know, protecting pilgrims and, you know, keeping the sites open and this, that and the other. So in 1118, that's when they're officially, they get sort of the charter, if you like, from the Pope. They get the thumbs up, and they decide they're going to do this. They're going to protect Muslims, pilgrims on the road from attack from Islamic forces, from the Muslims, etc. But they do make a lot of friends over there as well. They're going to have to, because the first mystery appears at this point, okay? Because you've got 9 knights. There's only 9 of them originally, and they've only got about 4 horses between them. That's where you get the Templar seal of 2 knights on 1 horse. It's not some kind of, you know, people have said, oh, is that some kind of weird sexual ritual, you know, where they used to do something. Oh, honestly, the nonsense, the rubbish they write about it. It's a sign of poverty. It's the fact that they can only afford 1 horse between 2 of them.
Wow.
But the other thing is, they end up on the Temple Mount. That's where they get the name from, Templars, because they're in Solomon's Stables, which is this structure that sits on the side of the Temple Mount. Nobody can really fathom why they decided to pick that. It's a huge building, and there's only 9 of them and a few like pages and hangers-on and, you know, people that look after the horses and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So they're in this enormous building. And this is where the mystery begins, because there are tens of thousands of Islamic soldiers all over the Middle East. That's it. That's their lands. That's where they are. But there's only 9 of these guys, so they're not going to be any use.
No.
You know, this idea that they're, you know, they're going to be able to protect pilgrims. You know, there's thousands of pilgrims flooding into the Holy Land. You know, they're coming in Acre, they're coming out of Jafar, coming in from all the ports. They're all flowing in. But there's still only 9 Templars. So that's the first problem, tied with the fact that they're then in this building on the side of the Temple Mount, and it's known that they started tunnelling towards the site of the original Solomon's Temple. And the reason they know that is that the Templar tunnel is still there. You know, years ago, about 20 or 25 years ago, you could go and the guides would show you inside that which is now a mosque, Solomon's Stables. They'd show you where the entrance to the tunnel was. So clearly they were after something. Yeah. That's your first conspiracy is what on earth were they doing and why were they there and what were they looking for? You know, where were they going? So that brings them into being. That brings them into existence.
Yeah, so they were always called the Templars? And why Jerusalem here? I mean, are we speaking
well, Jerusalem's the holy city, so they're heading to try and, like I said, release that city so it's opened up to everybody, so all sorts of pilgrims can go there. But, you know, they're going to have to get friendly with the locals or they're not going to succeed in doing that.
Yeah, exactly, right.
You know, so straight away we know that they're going to be talking to the Sufis, the Islamic holy men. Uh-huh. They're talking to all the different sects of Islam, all the different types of people that are there. And pilgrims from all over the world are coming in, so they're talking to people from all over the place. So it's not just the French knights. We also know it wasn't just the French that was on crusade. You know, you've got the Spanish, you've got the Italians, you've got people from Britain, you've got Germans. Most of the first crusade, in fact, 2/3 of it, they think were made up of Vikings. They think Viking mercenaries went over there to fight, which is what the Normans are. You know, when we think of Norman knights and that, they're just the descendants of the Vikings. That's all they are. So that doesn't surprise me either. Right. So there's, you know, they get there, and the idea of being Templars, they actually officially become, let me get this right, the poor knights of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. They become that order round about 1118.
That's a big wow.
It is a wow. And the other thing as well that they always get wrong, because you'll always see this on the History Channel, it always makes me laugh. oh, let's do some Knights Templar. So they got all these guys dressed in white with socking great big red crosses on that look like St. George.
Yeah.
You know, they're thundering down the hillside on the back of a horse going, whoa, you know what I mean? Well, there's several problems with that. The first problem is it wasn't until the second or even the third crusade that they were granted the right to wear the red cross.
Yeah.
So if they're trying to depict the Templars in the early days, they're wrong to start with because they didn't use the red cross till later on.
They didn't, and they didn't wear those outfits.
No, they didn't, because you can imagine that.
And they don't
imagine
they don't.
running
Well,
around.
they don't give you any of the history before all this. They
No,
start
they're
off
running around in the desert wearing brilliant white with a socking great red target on the front of them. And you know, the Islamic armies are notorious for having compound bows. You know, they've got some of the best archers in the medieval world. So, you know, if you came thundering out in the middle of the desert dressed like that, you'd be dead instantly. It'd just be like wallop, you know, and that's it.
That's what's always never made sense to me, you know. All the
it doesn't. It doesn't. What they did was they allowed all the armour to rust, or they painted the armour out. They didn't wear what we would understand to be white, because you couldn't do bleach white back then. You had this kind of creamy colour, which actually blends quite well into desert sand, and they would dye them down. The crosses were only about the size of the palm of your hand. And they were stitched on, so they were there for identification. So at a distance, these guys would just blend into the dust, into the desert dust. And the depictions of them, some of them are wearing full-on, like, orange sand colour. Some of them are wearing blue or even black. Yeah. But if you know anything about desert warfare, both of those colours blend in. The black and the blue disappears.
It's amazing to me, because here we are, we're talking about something that no one knows, Mark. This is one.
Well, this is one pretty much everything I've just said, you know. And the idea that some of the Templars were nobles as well, they wouldn't have the red cross on, they would have their own coats of arms. So you get a lot of depictions of the knights fighting on the Crusades, fighting in the Middle East, and they're wearing their own colours.
Right.
Because it makes sense, because then if they drop on the battlefield, you know who they are, and instead of just getting killed and all the stuff nicked, they'd be dragged off the battlefield and ransomed. You know, at least they'd survive, they'd be still alive. Just to put a little hint of confusion on this, though.
Oh, we don't need that.
Well, as the Crusades move on, the Templars stay as the Templars, the Hospitallers stay as the Hospitallers, but there's a lot of mercenaries. There's a lot of knights that are out there that are actually fighting for the opposition. So on the battlefield, it's also quite hard to tell who's who. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Both sides look remarkably similar, and they're using the same technology. So, you know, you couldn't be 100% certain who was who without knowing what colours they were wearing, you know, and how they appear to be. And there were other orders of knights. I mean, you had the Patriarch of Jerusalem. He has this cross with an extra bar on it, as well as the Hospitallers with their cross. You've then got this bunch of knights that you definitely would not want to be standing next to, and they're wearing green crosses, and they're called the Knights of Lazarus. They're all lepers, so they don't care if they die. You know what I mean? They're leprous knights. So they don't give a toss, but you wouldn't want to be standing next to them in case you got leprosy. And then you've got the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Knights of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre guarded that particular specific site because it's the tomb of Christ. They wore the cross of Jerusalem, the big sort of yellow cross with the little tiny crosses in. Because there are 5 crosses, they represent the 5 wounds of Christ. So you've got the big one in the middle and then these tiny ones, which became the Pilgrim's Cross. So there's lots of these different orders running around. If you watch the film Kingdom of Heaven, it's a fantastic production movie. That's getting there. That's getting pretty close.
Is it
yeah,
really?
that's getting close to how it would have been. It's still Hollywood, you know, but it's good Hollywood.
Yeah. So, but Mark, I mean, okay. So how because now I'm thinking, okay, now I'm seeing what you're saying about, you know, the past, and now let's bring them up to where History Channel is. They have them in their robes, and there's generally 3 of them, and they make it look like there's no army, which I know there was. And so tell me about from there. So why the name, okay? and how they start there when they
Okay,
have
okay.
that white robe and Jerusalem.
Well, by the time you get to 1128 AD, they are then monks. They're officially recognised by the Pope. They've got the badge, so they've got the Red Cross. That's official, okay. They're officially stationed on the Temple Mount, so that's why they're called Templars, because they're on the site of the old original temple in Jerusalem. So Solomon's temple was there, David's temple was there in the BC period. Coming through to the AD period, the last Jewish temple was destroyed there by the Romans in 70 AD. By medieval times, most people had mistaken the Al-Aqsa Mosque for the temple. So if you ever see any old maps, there's this funny domed-looking structure that's got Templar Solomonis over it. And actually, no, that was built in the 7th century by one of the sultans. But even then, this tells you a little bit about, comings and goings of the different religious faiths. Even then, they didn't build it on top of the site of the temple. They built it next to the site of the temple. So there's this big patch of blank ground which had nuns on it for some period of the medieval, some part of the medieval period. It had a nunnery on it. But that patch of ground, that's where the actual temple was.
I see.
And what they think, because now you're getting into History Channel stuff, they think the Templars were digging towards the basement of Solomon's original temple. So you can imagine the Romans come in, they burn the temple down, so all the temple treasures, the scrolls, anything that anybody wanted to protect, they'd have put in the basement underground. That's the thinking, to protect it, and then shut all the doors and hope that it didn't catch fire.
Right.
So they reckon that's what the Templars were going after. And you get a lot of this on the History Channel. There's a lot of theories about what they were digging for, why they were stationed where they were, why there were so few of them.
They were digging for the treasure and...
The temple treasure.
Yeah, the temple treasure and protecting it. Correct?
Well, if they could find it. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because they clearly discovered something. Because by the time you get into the 1130s, 1140s, 1150s, they are incredibly rich. They're starting to attract significant members of the order. They're really pulling themselves together. As an army, as a mini army, they're beginning to multiply, and it looks like they found something. And this is where the theories start creeping in. Nobody knows for certain. Was it the Ark of the Covenant? Was it the temple treasure, so it's silver and gold? Was it, the scrolls, the writings, secret writings, which actually I kind of favour that. I think they actually came up with some kind of library. I think that's what was hidden in the basement down there. But they certainly...
You think what?
A library, like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
A library.
Yeah, a library. I think they got hold of loads of information there.
From the monks and their books?
From the people that had been there in previous centuries.
Okay, so the library. So they had a library down there, and you're not thinking the treasure or anything like that?
Well, it could be. It could be treasure. Okay. If you go off in that direction, there are some interesting stories associated with them again. It's said, for example, that at Axum in Ethiopia, it was red-headed, blue eyes, white people wearing tartan that turned up in Ethiopia carrying this enormous box. And it eventually ends up at Axum. It ends up in this church in Axum in Ethiopia. And all the Ethiopian churches don't have altars. They have boxes, they have arks instead, which are all said to be copies of the master ark made by Solomon in the Old Testament, that was said to be recovered by Templars from the temple site in Jerusalem and then brought to Ethiopia. Although there's another legend that says it happened much earlier than that. It goes back to the Queen of Sheba and all that sort of thing. It goes back into the BC period. So there's lots of theories. Probably the best book to go on that is Graham Hancock's book, The Sign and the Seal. That covers this search for Templar connections and the Ark. What's interesting though, the rock-cut churches of Ethiopia, these are churches that were made after the Ark arrived, they're all cut in the shape of a cross. They're covered in Templar crosses.
Wow, okay.
That,
I didn't know that
flared red cross. It's all over the place. So even if they didn't actually bring the Ark, then I think the Templars, eventually migrated out of the Holy Land. They went south and they ended up in Egypt. They were influenced by the Coptic Church. And it's not a great, leap of faith to say they didn't go exploring and then finished up at the source of the Nile, which is going into Ethiopia. That whole area, I think the Templars were all over the Middle East. As they increased, they had 300 years, to play with.
Yeah.
Consequently, they end up everywhere. They end up all over the place.
Well, yeah, and they're a pretty big army by now,
Yeah.
Or were they shot off still at that time?
Well, no, the thing with the Templars, they tended to be professional soldiers. So you'd end up in a world where most of the armies were made up of conscripts, and people that they've dragged in. They were the world's first professional standing army. So it would only take about 400 or 500 of them to cause real problems for the enemy. They were fighters. They were capable of making the best use of what they had. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when they made a last stand at the city of Acre, which we know they did, there was only 500 of them to protect the entire city against a Muslim army of over 30,000. So you got 500 versus 30,000, they don't stand a chance. But the Muslims wouldn't attack Acre, they wouldn't attack it because of the Templars, because of them being in there, inside their castle.
Wow.
And sure enough, the Templars, despite being, made offers to leave, they were, said, we'll let you get on your ships and sail off, we're not bothered, we just want the city. They refused and they died to the very last man. They fought to the last man standing. Yeah. Now, as a result of that, they had this phenomenal reputation, absolutely incredible reputation as fighters. There's a nice twist in this, actually. I'm going to give you a nice little twist that most people don't know. There was a couple doing some research in the south of France. They were looking at the records of the Templar commanderies, the bits that had survived, because there aren't that many records around covering Templar things, because they were all destroyed by the Ottomans on Cyprus in the 1500s. That's what they think happened to the records. But there are some surviving in southern France. And what was happening was these knights were going off on crusade and then not coming back. So their ladies were inheriting their lands, their castles, their weapons, their money. Mm-hmm. And by the time you'd finished, by the third and fourth crusade, female Knights Templars outnumbered male Knights Templars 2-1.
Oh, this is a huge surprise.
They're only following in the tradition of, they're following in the tradition of the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, because ladies were equal fighters, they were of equal standing back then.
And they don't tell you about any of that.
No, that's something new. But that's what they've discovered. So things like, come fast forward, you look at something like Joan of Arc, everyone's like, oh yeah, 1400s, Templars have gone, she's fighting the English, she's just this completely unique, maid who has a vision and goes to war and wears armor. And no, she's not. She's not new. She's not unique. She's following in hundreds of years of tradition of female knights who fought on behalf of the church as part of the Knights Templar. Mm-hmm. So that again, that's another hint that perhaps the Templars didn't just disappear overnight, as some historians would have it. They lingered on a long time.
Yeah, my question is I know we've gotten into a lot of unknown stuff. Like I just want to ask the question of like the Holy Grail, okay, and the treasure that everyone talks about that. So what is the truth?
Okay, well the Holy Grail's a nice one. That's actually quite a nice story. First of all, you've got to decide, what is the Holy Grail? What is it? Because I've got at least 27 different versions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to narrow the Grail down to two things, okay? There's only two things really that are the true Grail. The Grail, capital T, capital G. That's the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper.
Yeah.
And the cup that the disciples used at the Last Supper. So you've then got two cups. You've got the cup of Christ and the cup of the disciples. Both of those stone cups were known to be kept at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre right up to Anglo-Saxon times. So you're talking about 800 AD. That's where they were. So it's reasonable to assume that when the Crusades kicked off a couple of hundred years later, those cups were taken out of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and they were put somewhere for safekeeping. Okay?
Yes.
Now, at that point, you'd think the story would come to an end. Well, it doesn't. This is where it gets really exciting. At the time of the Third Crusade, when Saladin was in charge, and when it's Richard the Lionheart, so you're right into full Crusader time periods now, right into it, early 1300s, early 1200s. You're into this full Crusader period. Another couple that were doing research into Islamic manuscripts over in the Middle East, because there's lots of these Islamic, manuscripts that we in the West have not researched. Well, these two that are looking at this have travelled over there from Spain to have a look at these shipping receipts, and sure enough, two of the shipping receipts turn out to be, are you ready, for the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And the first shipping receipt, when they translate that, it says, Holy Grail was kept at this church outside the walls of Jerusalem. We surrendered it to, they refer to them as Rumis. Rumis are Templar knights, they're basically knights. We surrendered them to these Templar knights. We stuck this thing on a ship and we sent it to the King of Spain. Now, at which point you think, oh, what's going on?
Yeah.
Then you get an entry that says, on its travels, Saladin had a sick daughter and he wanted a piece, he wanted a little bit of the stone to heal his daughter. So while it's in the possession of the Templars, they scrape this little bit of stone off, they send it off to Saladin.
Absolutely.
His daughter's healed. Well, his daughter's healed, and then this little fragment goes into Saladin's treasury. Meanwhile, this cup is then transported to Spain, and you get another shipping receipt that says, and the good news is, the cup has arrived. Now then, go over to Spain. There's a cup called the Chalice of Donna Urraca, which is kept in one of the churches over there. And this chalice has been archaeologically dismantled, so they can see how it's been made. Right. And the cup in the top is a 1st century Roman onyx cup. Now that's one of them. Now the trouble is there's another chalice as well that's almost identical but doesn't have the slice carved out of the rim. So that presumably is the cup of the disciples, and the chalice of Donna Urraca is in fact the Holy Grail. It's the chalice that Christ used at the Last Supper. So we know where both of them are, but it's took a huge, enormous story to find them. Okay. So yes, I can answer that one. I can say there's no doubt in my mind that they had the Holy Grail.
So you can go there now and still visit it without it being under lock and key, or is it up, or what?
I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly which monastery it's in. Right. If you look up Chalice of Donna Urraca, which is in Spain, it'll tell you exactly where it is. You can go to this particular monastery and it's on display over the altar in a cabinet. And guess what? It's still protected by an order of warrior monks.
Wow, that's just fantastic.
The warriors of the chalice still protect it.
Yeah, and see, they say these things, they're trying to find them, I mean, a lot of shows say they're trying to find them.
They're still trying to find the other 25 grails.
Yeah.
There's so many different variations of what a grail can be.
Yeah.
But the grail, capital T, capital G, I'm going to nail my colours to the mast and say that's the one. That's where I think it is.
That would be fantastic to see. Now, I know there's someone famous. I mean, did anyone famous join the Knights Templar? You talked a little bit about that too.
Well,
I don't know.
Well, your first one's Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart is probably the most famous Templar of all time. And there's no doubt that he was in the Order of Templars, because when he was coming back to Britain, the German emperor captured him. And there's a beautiful little manuscript depiction of, Richard giving homage to this German emperor. And he's wearing basically a Templar hoodie with the Templar cross on it. So you've actually got, written evidence that was documented at the time that he was a member of the order. And everything you know about Richard the Lionheart, everything you hear about him, tells you that he has Templar values. For example, he got all the way on Crusade, he got all the way to the walls of Jerusalem. And then he stopped And he said, I'm not going into the holy city because I am a warrior, I am drenched in blood, it is too holy for me. So can you imagine that? A king travels all that distance to get to Jerusalem and then doesn't go in. He stops. Now that tells you something about, you know, where he's at and his mindset. I mean, this is one hell of a guy, you know. He was friends, respectful friends with Saladin. You know, they communicated with each other. And then you got this wonderful story that when he eventually did get back to the UK, because he was only over here for about 6 or 7 months in the whole time that he was king, he bumps into Robin Hood. And there's this wonderful story of how they kind of have a bust up because Robin thinks he's a trespasser, doesn't know who the hell he is, and he's, you know, he's in Robin's forest. So they end up having a bit of a bust up. But the king, you know, sees it for what it really is and realises Robin's just trying to protect the king's land. And he says, well, I am the king, you know. And Robin's like, oh, hey, whoa, sorry. As you would. You know, and then, you know, basically at that point, Richard makes Robin a knight. So, you know, that's another famous character to add to the list.
That's all in this book, or that's in the Robin Hood books?
Yeah, that's in the Robin Hood book.
Okay.
That's
okay.
Yeah. So the Holy Grail stuff obviously is in the Arthur book, and then that's in the Robin Hood book. So I have managed to put some of that material out there. You know, so yeah, there are a couple of famous characters. I can't really think of any more, but there were a lot. I think King Henry II of England is a Templar. I think a lot of the people connected to the Pope, a lot of the papal folks and the papal families end up becoming Templars. Those original 9 knights, by the way, represent 9 families, and all of those families have got royal connections. I certainly think one of them goes back to the Plantagenets. So by the time you start to see where the web is, you know, where all the connections are going, and then obviously if you fast forward into, you know, the mysteries that are left behind, Templars have got connections to Scotland. You know, there's a pretty good chance that when the Templar Order was dissolved in this country, most of the Templars went to Ireland and to Wales and to Scotland, and they fought for Richard. They fought for Robert the Bruce.
Did they go into the Masons too? Some of their beliefs and stuff go into the Masons? I heard that.
Well, okay. They're dissolved. They're officially dissolved as an order in 1314 by King Philippe of France. And the reason he dissolved them is a bit dodgy, because he actually ended up owing the Templars 2/3 of his land and most of his money. So basically, he just wanted to get rid of them because, you know, he was in debt up to the nines with them.
This is what brought them to an end.
Yeah, they were powerful, they were political, they were extremely rich. They invented the traveller's check, so they made a fortune over 300 years. They had land left to them. They had noble families. You know, and then the Crusades came to an end. You know, the last Crusade, when they got kicked out, then that was it. It was over and done with. You know, so you've got all these Crusaders with no Crusades. So you end up with this saying, you know, to drink like a Templar, because they were all hanging out in bars. You know, nothing to do kind of thing, working for the local nobility. That's where they ended up. So anyway, he dissolved the order, but the order on Friday the 13th, 1314, when it was dissolved, on Thursday the 12th, somebody had tipped them off, because they all piled into the Templar Navy, and this enormous navy, the biggest navy the world had ever seen, sails away from France, and nobody knows where it went.
Interesting.
Speaking of famous connections, when they sailed away, their flag was a black flag with a white cross on. And when they sailed away, they became outlaws. So it said that they stuck a skull on the cross, which became Skull and Crossbones. So the original pirates, if you like, are the Templars in 1314. Anyway, they all sail off. They all disappear. I am going to answer your question.
Wow.
Because one of the places they're said to have ended up is Scotland. And at this point, we're into the territory where people are saying that the medieval stonemasons had gathered into guilds. I mean, I'm cutting this down really into short bites, you know, and that those stonemasons ultimately were developing in the direction of modern day Freemasons. You know, that's where they were going. So in the process of doing that, through the 1300s, the 1400s and the 1500s, Scottish masonry picked up the Knights. They picked up Knights Templars. They picked up the way they did things, you know, adopted them, if you like. And that's that's in a nutshell what they're saying happened at that point. And there is some evidence, there's a little bit of archaeology knocking around in Scotland that kind of hints at the fact that the knights never went away. Because Scotland was out of the reach of...
They're actually still with us, but just through different...
Yeah. I mean, well, that is a good question. Are the Knights Templars still with us? Well, the answer is yes, but it's going to be a surprising answer. When the Knights were dissolved, nobody anywhere went after all the servants, all the stable guys, all the ladies, the lady knights and all the rest were left alone. A lot of the preceptories, survived, and a lot of the Templars escaped. So they weren't actually done away with in 1314. In this country, Edward I, Edward II and Edward III really liked the Templars, so they don't actually get dissolved till 1334. And when they do get dissolved, they give all of their property, everything, to the Hospitallers, because the Hospitallers are still there. And then they scatter, they become mercenaries. So you end up with things like, have a look at the flag in Switzerland, a white flag with a red cross in the middle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I wonder where the Templar money ended up. That's all I'm going to say. And a lot of them scattered off and started working for other countries as mercenary orders of knights. So you get Knights of the Round Table and Order of the Garter over here. You get Order of the Fleur-de-Lis. There's so many other different knights, Knights of Calatrava, Knights of Malta. They really these orders start to proliferate. So in a nutshell, they just rebrand. What you're looking at is medieval rebranding.
Wow.
So by the end of the 1300s, they're everywhere. And if they got away from Catholic lands, if they got out of the reach of the Catholics, then there was no papal authority. The Pope had no authority over them. Now, in 1380, the new Pope actually opened up the Inquisition on the Templars again. He had a look at the court case and he actually said, do you know what? There's nothing wrong with these guys. I don't agree with the King of France. I don't think they should have been dissolved. And he absolves them of all wrongdoing. That's in 1380. So by 1390, 1400, you could go back to being a Templar if you wanted to. There wasn't a problem, as long as you didn't do it in France. So then you end up with this situation where there are loads of these other orders running along exactly the same lines.
Exactly.
Bringing it up to date, so to answer the question, nowadays you've got several different versions of what a Templar is. You've got Masonic Templars, which appear to be adopted by Masons, and you've got Hospitallers there as well, but that's part of Freemasonry. You've then got what I would call independent orders of knights. So there are Templars, there's about 18 or 19 or 20 different orders of Templars scattered all the way across Europe. So for example, over here we've got Knights Templar of England and Wales. They're not connected to anybody, they're independent orders, but they all talk to each other. They've all been talking to each other for about 300 years. So they still exist. I'm going to take a stab that the American orders of Templars, if they want to trace their pedigree, they'll probably find they're part of that particular branch, okay? They will be one of the survivals of independent orders. And then there is a third possibility. There is the third possibility that there are out there still Catholic Templars, which are the original branch of Knights Templar, running to monastic rule. There's still the possibility that some of those orders correspond to the original orders of Templars. So you've got those three. You've got sort of the Masonic, you've got the independent, and you've got the Catholic. The Catholics still have other orders as well, by the way. There's lots of other Catholic knightly orders you can join, which relate back in some way to the orders of knights. So no, they've not disappeared at all.
Wow,
really.
This is just, you just cram my brain. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you remember all this stuff. It's like your brain is like unbelievable. But you just talking about it, I've got so much information. It's like all crowded. It's like trying to take it all in at one time. So for me, this would definitely be, for me, not doing an interview, but for me to get the book when it comes out and read it, because I just find it so fascinating, and I believe it, and I know there's a lot more to it after us doing this show. Okay, there's a lot more you could talk about, but we're
we've hardly touched on some of the mysteries that are out
know.
there, you know. Hardly
well, did
touched
you want
on
to
them.
do a part 2 on this, Mark? Or
Hey, we'll see how it goes. By all means, I really don't mind doing it. If you want to just, because we've looked at the beginning of them and we've looked at the end of them.
Yeah, because
but there's a lot of stuff in between.
I just don't really feel like we
Yeah.
got everything. You know, we just kind of started and then wisp, you know, kind of through it. So we'll talk about it and you know, hopefully do a part 2 if you want. It's up to you. But
I'll do part 2. Yeah.
That's all we have time for today. And plus, people don't really want to watch anything that's any more than 40 minutes long.
Hey, I was just getting going as well. What you'll have to do is you'll have to have a look at the comments and see what people say.
Yeah.
And have a look at the sort of subjects and the topics they want to tackle.
Yeah.
And I'll put it on record here that if we do come back and do a second one, you know, people please send in what you want to know about, you know, conspiracy theories, whatever that relate to the Templars.
Yeah.
And we'll cover it. We'll cover it in a part 2, you know. Let's do it.
We always work together really well. So anyways, all you guys out there, Mark and I are going to discuss if we're going to be doing a part 2, which most likely we will be. And this stuff is incredible. I find it, thanks Mark so much. I just love it. I love the fact that he's on my show and he's a great person and damn, I want to go to the UK, but I don't today because it's windy and cold and I'm not into that.
Yeah, it's not good at the moment.
So anyways, we'll say bye for now and thank you for viewing. And give us those questions on this, you know, so we can see if what you're interested in. That would be fantastic. All right, and share. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Mark.
Bye for now.